All right, hi everyone, how's it going? And welcome to another video. Now, it's been a little while since I've done a video. I've been thinking about what I want to do a video on, and for a while I've been wanting to do a movie review on Superman 2. So that's what I'm going to do this video on. Now, the reason why I want to do a video on Superman 2 is because Superman 2 is one of my favorite movies of all time. I would put it in my top 10. I think it's the definitive superhero movie. And I think in a lot of ways, it was really the blueprint of the modern superhero film. Just the whole idea of the superhero fighting supervillains and them throwing each other around in a city. That originates with Superman 2. And that's what I want to talk about. I do have some of the movie posters associated with it. Here's one of them. This is back when they used to have the actors' pictures right on the poster like that. I don't think they really do that much anymore. They used to do that all the time in the 70s and even into the 80s. Here's one I like quite a bit. This is an alternative movie poster for Superman 2. I think this is a cool poster for sure. You have Superman, of course, and you have General Zod. Then right there you have Nan and Ursa. So yeah, definitely a cool movie poster. There's another one for Superman 2. And here's one for Superman 2, but this is for what's been known as the Donner cut. And I'll talk a little more about the Donner cut later. So, like I said, the reason why I wanted to do a video on Superman 2 is I'm a big fan of the film. I think it's the definitive superhero film. And like I said, I also believe it's the blueprint. Now, of course, before Superman 2, there was Superman 1, and that came out in 1978. Superman 2 was 1980. Now, in 1978, it marked the 40th anniversary since the comic had begun in 1938. So there was this whole big thing as to whether or not people would want to see a big budget superhero film, because they had never been done before. Superman was going to be the first one. And what had happened was a father and a son, known as the Salkinds, had purchased the rights from Warner Brothers to do Superman movies and TV series for 25 years. The reason why Warner Brothers didn't want to do a Superman film was because they didn't think it would really attract much of an audience. Superhero films were generally thought of as being for kids in those days. And, it's a different time in a lot of ways. There wasn't this idea that, well, maybe adults would like it too. So they didn't really want to make a Superman movie. But the Salkinds, especially the younger Salkind, definitely saw potential in a big budget superhero film. And they hired a director, an individual by the name of Richard Donner, and they began shooting Superman 1 and also Superman 2 simultaneously alongside of it. And Superman 1, when it came out, the first Superman movie, was a huge success. And a lot of people went to go see it. Richard Donner wanted it to be kind of on par with like Star Wars, if he could. He wanted this big epic because, like I said, there was this idea kind of if you made a superhero film, there was this idea that it should be done in a camp style, kind of like the 1960s Batman series or like Flash Gordon. There was this idea if you did that kind of movie, you would have to do it in sort of a camp style. But Richard Donner felt like it could be done in this big epic style reminiscent of Star Wars. and even brought John Williams in to score the film. Really had an excellent score, and like I said, it did great at the box office. While they were working on Superman 1, they were working on Superman 2 as well. And Superman 2, although it did ultimately become a great film, there was a lot of difficulties and disasters in the production of Superman 2. For one, Richard Donner was actually fired as director while filming Superman 2. He had already shot 75% of the film, and they just fired him because he wasn't getting along with the Salkinds. They were the producers, like I said, and there was just a lot of friction. It got to the point where supposedly it got so bad he couldn't even stand to be in the same room as these guys anymore. So ultimately, they ended up firing him, and that was very unpopular. Gene Hackman, who played Lex Luthor, refused to reshoot his scenes. I know Margaret Kidder was upset about it as well, as was the guy who played Non, Jack O'Halloran. He was upset about this. Christopher Reeve, who played Superman, supposedly was just willing to kind of go along with it. It's been said, though, that if Christopher Reeve would have walked off the set, the Salkinds would have been forced to bring back Richard Donner as the director, but he didn't. He agreed to play ball, and he agreed to the work with the new director in finishing the Superman movie in order to get credit. The new director, who was an individual by the name of Richard Lester, had to shoot about 50% of the film if he wanted credit as a director. So he began filming new scenes, and it's been said that his version of it tended to be a little more comical and quirky in parts. But I don't know. I watched both versions, the Donner cut and the Lester cut, back to back. And there's some kind of goofy silliness in the Donner cut as well. There's some things that really don't gel. There's plot holes in the Donner cut. I like the theatrical version more, the Richard Lester cut. I know there's a number of fans who prefer the Donner cut, but to me, the Donner cut just doesn't feel finished. It feels very disjointed, and it feels like, had they finished it, okay, maybe I would be saying I prefer the Donner cut, but it's really very much, an unfinished film. And what had supposedly happened was Margaret Kidder, in I think the early 2000s or so, said that there was an alternate version of Superman 2 called the Donner Cut, and that Richard Donner was planning on putting this out. Well, he did around 2006. He put it out, and he added a number of things. For example, the bad guys, the villains from Krypton, are in the Phantom Zone, and there's this scene where the Phantom Zone is kind of going through like a cosmic storm, and he added this like CGI that really looks kind of phony. I mean, it's pretty bad CGI that he added, and sometimes that could happen when you have something that's old, like say something from the 70s or 1980, and then it's then edited and CGI's added. Sometimes that doesn't look right. I know with the Star Wars special editions, some of that CGI looked good and some of it did not. Well, this CGI, because the movie, is from 1980, just didn't really look great at all. I mean, it really had a weird look to it. And then the nuclear weapon blows up the Phantom Zone, and then when General Zod gets out, and this is in the Donner cut, he goes free. I mean, I thought that was kind of corny, So then, there were a number of other things with the Donner cut as well that just don't really gel properly or just seem very awkward. For example, when Lois Lane suspects that Clark Kent is Superman, this is in the Donner cut, she jumps out of a window and then Superman has to save her, but she doesn't know it's, Superman. I just thought that was a weird scene. It makes Lois look kind of crazy. There's another scene where she takes a gun and then fires it at Clark Kent. And then, you know, shortly after he's shot, he then confesses to being Superman. Well, then she admits after that it was only a blank. So again, that also makes Lois look kind of crazy. It's just a very awkward scene, and a lot of those in the Donner cut for sure, especially the ending. Oh, I did not like the ending for the Donner cut. But before the ending, I should mention this because Marlon Brando was in Superman 1. He was not in the theatrical version, the Richard Lester cut of Superman 2, because there was some sort of a dispute involving money where the Salkinds didn't want to pay Marlon Brando for Superman 2, so they deleted his scenes. Well, in the Donner cut, Richard Donner brought back the Marlon Brando scenes that had been shot. I feel like the Marlon Brando scenes are kind of awkward. There's scenes where his head is huge. There's scenes where it kind of looks sort of CGI like, where he's kind of floating. It just seemed kind of awkward to me. And as opposed to the theatrical version where you just have Superman's mother, Lara, in this like crystal thing. It looks pretty cool. It looks pretty well done the way they did that. But yeah, so there's other things too. The ending, I mean, the ending of the Donner cut is not good at all. I mean, I hate that ending. What happens was in Superman 1, there's that scene where Superman reverses time to save Lois Lane. Well, they were originally going to have that in Superman 2, but they only had it in Superman 1 because they didn't think they were going to be able to use it for Superman 2 because they weren't sure if Superman 1 would be a success or not. Well, it was, but the Donner cut included the time reversal thing. So, what happens is Superman, in order to get Lois Lane to forget about the fact that he's Superman, he reverses time. So now it's like the whole movie never even happened. Like he never fought the villains, he never fought General Zod. It's just like the whole thing never happened. There's the scene in the bar where when Superman loses his powers, he gets attacked by a trucker, and then he returns as with his Superman powers and throws the trucker across the bar. Well, he does that in this scene. However, none of the other stuff that led to this revenge ever happened if he reversed time. So it kind of makes Superman look like the bad guy here. So yeah, it's just I do not like the ending of the Richard Donner cut. I much prefer the ending of the Richard Lester cut because in the ending of the Richard Lester cut, he basically gets Lois to forget about the fact that he's Superman with a mind erasing kiss. Now, I know that sounds awkward and strange, but that actually did happen in the comic book. That was in the comic book. So, yeah, and just to say a bit about other things, I did think, Terrence Stamp did a really good job as playing General Zod. I thought his portrayal of General Zod was excellent. A few years ago, they did a film, Man of Steel. I believe the guy's name was Michael Shannon, and he played General Zod. He played General Zod more like a general. Terrence Stamp played General Zod more like this real powerful Antichrist type figure. Because just imagine, if you have these criminals that had come from Krypton, and in Krypton, they have a red sun, so they don't have special powers on Krypton. But on Earth, because Earth has a yellow sun, suddenly they have these superpowers. So when they discover their superpowers, these bad villains, essentially want to take advantage of that and overthrow the Earth. Superman, on the other hand, goes a different route. He wants to help people and is more selfless. But these villains ultimately, want to try to take over Earth. And of course, there's the backstory of the fact that they tried to overthrow Jor-El on Krypton, and apparently Nan, the big guy in this, who doesn't say much, apparently was this like brilliant scientist, but he supported the insurrection of General Zod, so he was lobotomized, and that's why he just makes those grunting sounds. But yeah, anyways, that's what happened there, and it's just an interesting story. They try to, like I said, take over the Earth. They go to the White House. It's kind of a sort of a goofy scene at the White House, but there's some fighting that ensues there. There Then what happens is they find out about Superman, and then in the Donner cut, Superman approaches the villains and he says to General Zod, "General, you care to step outside?" It's a really kind of cool scene because a showdown is about to happen. You're like, "Oh, this is going to be epic." A showdown is about to happen. But I'm sorry, that's the Lester cut. That happens in the Lester cut. In the Donner cut, Superman just goes, "What's the matter, General? Don't believe in freedom of the press?" So I don't. Again, another thing about the Donner cut I didn't like. There's little things like that throughout the Donner cut that I think make it not as good a movie as the Lester version, the theatrical version. So yeah, I definitely wanted to mention that about it because there's just quite a few different things. I mean, had the Donner cut been finished, had they actually finished the whole Donner cut, maybe the Donner cut would be the better movie. And then maybe Donner would have stayed on and done Superman 3 and 4, and maybe those would have been better movies. It's kind of funny because I do think about this sometimes. Like I said, I consider Superman 2 to be one of the best movies ever made. And the irony here is, I actually consider Superman 4 to be one of the worst movies ever made. I would put it in my top 5 of worst movies ever made, for sure. In fact, maybe at some point I'll do a video on my top 5 worst movies ever made. I would consider Superman 4 to be one of them. But yeah, anyways, I really like the practical effects that were used. That's what I like about the Lester version. A lot of practical effects. There wasn't CGI. They show planet Krypton. It looks really cool with all these crystals. I believe it was designed by a set designer who had also designed the Death Star. I mean, that's what I had heard. But it just looks really cool the way they designed everything. And like I said, yeah, I do definitely like the practical effects of this film. And anyways, there's that whole showdown, that whole fight scene. Like I said, there was the blueprint, I believe, for the modern superhero film of them throwing each other around. Couple awkward scenes where one of them, I think it was maybe Nan or General Zod, I'm not sure who, but he goes flying into the Statue of Liberty. Well, why does he fly into the Statue of Liberty? Is it New York or is it Metropolis? So yeah, there's some little things like that that just kind of are off, just kind of don't really fit right. But nonetheless, it's still a great movie. Then, there's the scene where they take Lois Lane and go to the Fortress of Solitude, and Superman faces them there. And this scene has gotten criticism for showing extra powers or different powers that Superman supposedly wasn't supposed to have. I know there's that weird scene where he pulls the plastic S off of his chest and like wraps around one of the bad guys. I mean, that's was definitely a weird scene. I don't know why they had that. And then there's the teleportation. But I do have to understand, even in the comics, I know Superman did occasionally have some strange powers. I know there was one power he had where he would shoot out of his hand like a miniature version of himself that would fight things and stuff, that would fight on his behalf. So, yeah, he had some weird powers in the comics occasionally as well. But, yeah, but nonetheless, Fortress of Solitude looks cool. It's a cool ending for it. And, Lex Luthor's there. I do want to say something about Lex Luthor because I know Gene Hackman plays Lex Luthor. Definitely did a good job. He plays it kind of initially. I know in the comics, Lex Luthor was portrayed as kind of like a mad scientist. Then later on, I know in the late 80s, in 1988, they began to portray him kind of as more of like a corrupt CEO. And that's the way he's portrayed in Superman the Animated Series. It's kind of this like corrupt CEO. But Gene Hackman plays him kind of like sort of the cross between maybe a mad scientist and like a gangster. But yeah, definitely he did a good job playing Lex Luthor in this for sure. But yeah, so anyways, there's alternate endings to it. Like I said, in one version, I know the Superman destroys the Fortress of Solitude. In another version, he doesn't. There was an edited scene where they had the villains get arrested at the end by some Arctic patrol or some Arctic police officers or something. But that was in like an alternate version. Although I had been told that that did air on TV back in the 80s. But yeah, so just wanted to talk about that. The two different versions. I do want to say a bit about the actors. Now, Christopher Reeve, this was this was his second movie. The first movie he did, I believe, was a submarine movie. Then he did this, and obviously, this was a huge film for him. Um, from what I understand, I don't think he really did too many movies after. The only one I've heard of was that one he did called Somewhere in Time. That was the only one I was aware of that he had done after Superman. So I don't, from what I've been told, Richard Donner, the cast has said this, really, um, you know, brought out his acting abilities like no director ever had. I mean, that's what they'll say. I know that's what Jack O'Halloran, the guy who plays Non, says in the interviews that I've read. But yeah, so um, this was really his breakthrough role, and also in this, I already mentioned Terrence Stamp did an excellent job of playing General Zod. Like I said, I liked how he played Zod, not so much as a general, but kind of like this all-powerful antichrist type figure. Someone who suddenly acquires massive amounts of power, and you know he's going to abuse it, but he has Superman to put him in check. So and like I said, great actor. And you also have, Sarah Douglas plays Ursa. She does a great job in this as well. Jack O'Halloran was the guy who played Non. This guy right here. Jack O'Halloran is very interesting to listen to in interviews. If you get a chance to check out some of his interviews, he really has an interesting story. Apparently, he was the illegitimate son of the gangster Albert Anastasia. And he had also, before he became an actor, he was a boxer. and he fought some of the big major heavyweights of the late 60s and 70s. He fought, he had a match with Ken Norton. Supposedly, he almost beat Ken Norton. He had another match with Foreman. He lost to Foreman. Then again, Foreman was undefeated in 40 fights until he fought Ali. So, yeah, he fought some major boxers of the day. And then once he left boxing, he became, an actor, started acting in different roles. And then, eventually, of course, landed the part of Nan in this movie. Apparently, there was supposedly some tension between, Nan, Jack O'Halloran, and Christopher Reeve on the set. And Jack O'Halloran says that's kind of been overblown. They were working together, and there was one incident in 4 years of working on the films where apparently I think Jack O'Halloran was upset over some of the things Christopher Reeve was saying about um, Jack O'Halloran's, past and his being the illegitimate son of Albert Anastasia, that whole thing. And as the story goes, Jack O'Halloran grabbed a hold of him on the set, and this was after he had had a talk with him. And apparently, he says Christopher Reeve was still kind of arrogant, so grabbed him and he was about to hit him in the face when the director goes, "Don't hit him in the face! Don't hit him in the face!" Because he's the star of the film. So he didn't hit him. But yeah, there was a bit of like an altercation where it could have been bad, but it wasn't. But that's the story behind that. Anyways, so just thought I would add that kind of interesting backstory. I have seen interviews with him, and like I said, check out some of his interviews if you haven't. Jack O'Halloran definitely has some interesting stories. I mean, you wouldn't think you would because he plays a character in the film that just grunts and makes those grunting sounds. But yeah, definitely an interesting to hear what he has to say. So yeah, so pretty much that's kind of what I got. I did want to talk about all this, the both of the cuts. Like I said, I like the theatrical release more. I definitely think that's the better film. I think that was definitely better than the Donner cut. Now, one thing I do want to say is a little bit about the sequels. There was Superman 3 that came out. Initially, in Superman 3, they were going to have the character Brainiac. However, what ended up happening was they kind of felt that a lot of the general public wouldn't know who Brainiac was, so they decided instead of having Brainiac, the enemy would just be like a supercomputer. But yeah, it would have been cool to see Brainiac in a Superman film because Brainiac is a Superman villain that I don't know if he's appeared in a movie yet, but definitely kind of an interesting character. He's kind of sort of like a Skynet or like the perfect example of AI run amok. He's this essentially this self-aware android, this like green android who goes around from world to world downloading data into his brain, into his like hard drive, becoming more and more intelligent. He's also very physically imposing. You can give Superman a fight. So definitely an interesting character. It's actually where the origin of the term Brainiac comes from, this character. I know he was in the comic. One of the things he does do is he like shrinks down cities, puts them under like glass. They were going to do a Superman 5 that was going to feature Brainiac. There had been a number of treatments on the script that had been done, but it never got made. And Christopher Reeve was even on board with this. And from what I heard, it really sounded like it would have been cool for some reason they never made it. They ended up then, making Superman Returns years later with Henry Cavill, and I think Henry Cavill is a good. I think that's his name, Cable. But I think he's a good Superman, but I don't think the writing is very good. But I do think, yeah, he plays the part well. But like I said, I just don't think the writing of those movies is great. I didn't really like Man of Steel, kind of because what I said with General Zod and all that. But I just didn't think it was as good as Superman 2. But anyways, I did want to talk about this because, Superman certainly the first big budget superhero film. I know in the 70s there were some other superhero films. I believe there was a Captain America film. I know there was a Doctor Strange and some Spider Man films, but none of those were big budget. None of those were big budget like Superman was. So, yeah, I just wanted to talk about this, tell you what I thought. If you watched this video, as always, I thank you for watching. Have a good night.